Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the person you loved, trusted, and shared a home with was living beside a darkness you never saw coming. A darkness so calculated, so quietly growing in the shadows that by the time it revealed itself, it had already rewritten the final hours of a young woman's life. This is not just a story of a crime. It is a story of a betrayal so intimate that it fractures the very idea of safety. A vanished daughter, a silent phone, lights that go out at midnight, and a boyfriend whose expression never changes. Every detail spirals into a chilling timeline where truth hides behind closed curtains, fabricated messages, and the illusion of normalcy. This is the case that forces us to confront the most terrifying question of all. What if the greatest danger is not a stranger in the dark, but the person sleeping on the pillow right next to you? Loving someone is an act of vulnerability. It is the decision to hand another person access to your inner world, the hopes you whisper only to yourself, the fears you hide behind your smile, the story of who you've been and who you hope to become. In healthy relationships, this exchange is reciprocal, balanced, and safe. But sometimes, that intimacy becomes a weapon. Sometimes the person who claims to love you is the one who slowly rearranges the walls of your world until you can no longer tell where your voice ends and their control begins. And that is what makes Phoenix Spencer Horn's story so haunting. It forces us to confront the quiet erosion of boundaries that often precedes catastrophic violence. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't impulsive. It was a slow descent. So subtle that Phoenix may not have recognized the danger until it was far too late. Love can be intoxicating. It can feel like being chosen, cherished, seen. For Phoenix, Methan was the man she called the love of her life. And like many victims of coercive control, she didn't see the shadows gathering at the edges of that affection. Control rarely announces itself with shouting. It arrives disguised as concern, as passion, as devotion. Where were you evolves into, why didn't you answer? Which transforms into, you don't care about me, and eventually becomes, you're not going anywhere. Partners who feel insecure often cling tightly, but partners who feel entitled tighten the grip. They confuse possession with affection, dominance with devotion. The tragedy is that the person being controlled often interprets these early signs as intensity, love, or emotional need. They normalize the shift, they adjust, they compromise on themselves little by little, until one day they realize the cost of staying has become dangerous. But leaving, emotionally, psychologically, or physically, can be fatal. Research in criminology shows that the most dangerous moment for a woman in an abusive relationship is when she attempts to leave. Not when she is unhappy, not when she is silently enduring, but when she decides she is done. When Phoenix's messages to friends revealed that she wanted out, that she was trying to create emotional distance, she was unknowingly stepping into the most perilous phase. For people like Methan, loss is intolerable. Abandonment is an injury they cannot metabolize. And instead of grieving, they punish. Instead of releasing, they destroy. What makes this case particularly chilling is the emotional coldness that followed. Not rage, not panic, not remorse, but emptiness. A void where humanity should have been. Love turned to possession. Possession turned to violence. Violence turned to methodical, calculated concealment. This is the anatomy of relational control at its most lethal. A partner whose identity depends on maintaining dominance will go to extraordinary lengths to restore it, even if it means erasing the person they claim to love. And still, even after committing the unthinkable, Methan stayed in that flat for nearly 2 days, sitting, drinking, texting from her phone as though she were still alive, fabricating a presence he had already destroyed. We often imagine that killers are chaotic, frantic, impulsive. But in intimate partner violence, the opposite is often true. Perpetrators become eerily calm because in their minds the chaos has ended. The emotional threat, the partner's autonomy, has been eliminated. What follows is cold management. Clean the scene, send the messages, control the narrative, maintain the illusion. It is a perverse imitation of order, and that is what makes it so psychologically disturbing. The deeper truth here is that violence is rarely about anger. It is about control. And control is the antithesis of intimacy. Healthy relationships thrive on fluidity, communication, partnership. Toxic relationships calcify into rigidity, silence, and dominance. Phoenix was not killed because she argued. She was not killed because of a sudden loss of temper. She was killed because she was trying to reclaim her independence, and some partners see a woman's autonomy as an existential threat. When we look back on Phoenix's story, we don't just see a crime. We see a pattern, a warning sign, a societal failure to recognize the signs of coercive control before it escalates. The noise the neighbors heard wasn't just the sound of violence. It was the sound of a boundary being brutally punished. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the hollow echo of a life extinguished by someone who believed he had the right to decide her fate. And that is the most haunting part. She trusted him, loved him, believed in the promise of a shared life. In loving him, she opened the door to the very vulnerability that he ultimately exploited. Her story reminds us that love is not enough. Safety is essential. Respect is essential. Autonomy is essential. And when any relationship begins to erode those foundations, the danger becomes real. Quiet at first, but then unmistakable, and finally, irreversible. This is the haunting truth. The person you love most can become the person you fear most, and the person you fear most can become the person who takes everything from you.
And the person who takes everything from you often believes, with chilling conviction, that they can shape reality to hide what they've done. Because control doesn't end with the act of violence. Control continues in the cover-up, in the lies, in the performance they stage for the world. This is where forensic truth becomes a silent but unrelenting witness. When Methan attempted to manipulate the narrative, sending cold, robotic text messages from Phoenix's phone, he underestimated the intelligence of those who loved her. He underestimated the emotional fingerprint every person leaves on their communication. Real relationships have patterns: the emojis we choose, the warmth we show, the structure of our sentences, the energy behind our words. And when he tried to mimic her, he revealed himself. The absence of warmth wasn't just a linguistic clue, it was a psychological confession. People who lack empathy cannot convincingly imitate it. They can perform normalcy, they can imitate routine, they can mimic the functional aspects of a person's life, but they cannot reproduce the emotional texture of a living, breathing human being. This is where the facade begins to crack. A perpetrator may be able to clean blood, move objects, craft stories, but they cannot rewrite their own behavioral inconsistencies. Forensic science is impartial. It doesn't care about excuses or emotional detachment. It simply records what is there. The soap residue, the glove behind the cabinet, the timing of the messages, the abrupt switching off of lights, the grainy shadows caught on CCTV. Every detail becomes a thread. And when those threads are pulled together, a portrait forms. A portrait of someone who didn't panic, someone who performed a sequence of tasks with clarity and continuity, someone who didn't lose control, but exerted it with persistence. Mathan's behavior wasn't chaotic, it was structured. He drove Phoenix's car wearing her jacket, a deliberate attempt to confuse the visual trail. He disposed of items near the river, a location chosen not randomly, but with intent, distance, and concealment in mind. He sat for hours, drinking, composing messages, thinking through the next move. People in a psychotic break do not operate in timelines. They do not methodically clean a room. They do not wait 48 hours in a locked apartment, preserving their story, sending fabricated messages, monitoring external reactions. They fracture. They unravel. But he did not unravel, he curated. And that is why the forensic contradictions became so damning. Every time he tried to explain himself, the physical evidence contradicted him. Every attempt to minimize the violence was exposed by the detailed condition of the crime scene. Every claim of memory loss was dismantled by timestamps, digital records, and surveillance footage. He claimed disorientation, yet visited multiple locations. He claimed panic, yet stayed for 2 days. He claimed love, yet his actions after her death were devoid of humanity. The facade he tried to maintain was a performance for himself as much as for the police. People who commit intimate partner homicide often construct narratives that allow them to remain the hero or the victim in their own story. I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't intentional. These narratives are not truth. They are psychological lifelines thrown into the darkness of their own guilt. But forensic logic does not bend for emotion. It does not negotiate. It simply reveals. And what it revealed here was meticulousness, intent, consistency over time, a pattern of behavior incompatible with loss of control. In court, that facade collapsed, because a facade can never withstand the weight of lived reality. It can only survive when no one is questioning it. And once witnesses spoke, once messages were analyzed, once timelines were reconstructed, his mask dissolved. What remained was not a man overwhelmed by emotion, but a man exposed by truth. And in that exposure, we see something crucial. Violence thrives on secrecy, but accountability thrives on evidence. The more he tried to hide, the more visible he became. The more he tried to silence Phoenix's voice, the louder the forensic echoes of her final hours sounded in the courtroom. His contradictions didn't just weaken his defense, they highlighted the very psychology that led to the crime, the belief that he could control the narrative as easily as he tried to control her life. But in the end, truth always finds its way out, because even in silence, even in darkness, even in attempts to erase her existence, Phoenix's story wrote itself into the physical world, into the scratches, the timing, the residue, the digital footprints. Her voice was gone, but the evidence spoke with unmistakable clarity. And that is where the illusion of control ends, when reality, piece by piece, dismantles the story the perpetrator tried to build.
And that is where the illusion of control ends, when reality, piece by piece, dismantles the story the perpetrator tried to build. But what happens afterward, in the wake of that collapse, is something far more difficult to quantify. Because violence is never contained to the moment of the act, nor to the walls of the crime scene. It radiates outward like a shock wave, disrupting every life it touches, unraveling trust, faith, and the belief that love is inherently safe. The devastation that follows a crime like this is not simply the grief of losing a daughter, a friend, a colleague. It is the shattering of an entire emotional ecosystem. Every person who loved Phoenix will carry not only the loss, but the haunting realization that someone she trusted enough to share her home with was capable of extinguishing her life so deliberately. And this is where the third keynote emerges in all its gravity, the ripple effect. The devastation doesn't stay with the perpetrator. It lands on everyone who survives. A family must now live with questions that have no answers. They replay conversations, moments, subtle instincts they dismissed, signals they didn't recognize, not because they were negligent, but because human beings do not walk through life anticipating the worst. They wonder if a different phone call, a different text, a different moment of intuition could have saved her. This is the cruel inheritance of violent loss. Guilt where there should be none. Regret where there was once love. Agony where there was once connection. Communities feel this rupture too. It unthreads the safety people believe exists in their everyday routines. Coworkers who saw her laughing behind a cafe counter now face an empty space where she once stood. Neighbors who heard a noise but didn't think it was danger now live with the knowledge that tragedy unfolded just inches away from their doors. Friends who once exchanged weekend plans and shared clothes and sent voice notes now encounter a silence that feels like a physical weight. And perhaps the most devastating ripple is the one that hits the future she was meant to live. Phoenix was 21. She had dreams, plans, small joys, routines, ambitions, the simplicity of mornings spent getting ready for work, and the complexity of deciding who she wanted to become as an adult. Her death did not just end a life, it ended every version of the future she might have lived, every birthday she would have celebrated, every conversation she would have had, every person she would have met. That is the kind of loss that cannot be measured. And what makes it even more heartbreaking is that violent crime steals not only the future of the victim, it steals the future of everyone connected to them. Her mother will never again hear her voice on the phone. Her friends will never again receive her laughter in their messages. Her workplace will never again feel her energy moving through it. Her community will never again experience her presence. Grief becomes a collective shadow. But there is another layer to this devastation, one that sits at the psychological core of why these crimes haunt us long after the verdict is delivered. When violence happens between strangers, it frightens us. But when violence happens within love, it destabilizes our most fundamental assumptions about what intimacy is meant to provide. We grow up believing that love is a sanctuary, that home is safety, that the person who holds our heart will protect it. When a partner becomes the perpetrator, it tears through that belief with ruthless precision. It forces us to question how well we truly know the people we love. It exposes the terrifying truth that affection and danger can coexist in the same space, hidden beneath gestures of tenderness. And it also underscores the profound responsibility society carries in recognizing early signs of coercive control, emotional suppression, and possessive behavior. The ripple effect reaches the legal system too. Prosecutors, investigators, forensic experts, every person involved in the pursuit of justice absorbs the emotional toll. They walk through scenes that are almost too painful to witness. They confront the darkest aspects of human behavior so families don't have to. They listen to recordings, analyze text messages, study remnants of a life that was violently cut short. And even though they are professionals, they are still human. These images stay with them. The ripple effect extends into the courtroom as well. Every testimony deepens the wound for the family. Every reconstructed timeline forces them to relive moments they wish they could erase. Every forensic detail becomes a reminder of her final hours. Justice provides closure, but it does not provide healing. Healing is something far more fragile, far more complicated, far more enduring. It requires time, community, compassion, and the acknowledgement that grief is not something you get over. It is something you learn to carry. And amidst all this devastation, there is also resilience. The human spirit bends, but it does not always break. People come together, not just in pain, but in remembrance. They speak her name so she is not erased. They tell her story so others may recognize signs earlier. They build meaning where there was senselessness. But the heart of the ripple effect is this. When a life is taken, the world doesn't simply lose one person. It loses every moment that person would have created, every person she would have helped, every joy she would have felt, every connection she would have nurtured. Violence destroys far more than a life. It destroys a universe of possibilities. And that is why these cases stay with us, because they remind us of the fragility of safety, the complexity of human relationships, and the urgent need to protect those who feel trapped in the silent corridors of coercive control, emotional suppression, and possessive behavior. Phoenix's story does not end in the courtroom. It continues in the hearts of everyone who mourns her, in the lessons her case imparts, in the collective resolve to ensure that no one else's future is stolen by the person who once claimed to love them. If you're still here watching, thank you. Before you go, please subscribe to our channel, Dark Frame Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life mystery like this.